The head coach carousel is over in the NFL. The Washington Commanders and Seattle Seahawks have found the men to take their franchises into the future. And Senior Bowl notes who's standing out this week in Mobile as the 2024 NFL Draft gets going. All that and more coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love all the everydayers. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. We appreciate you for that. Before the NFL world descends on Las Vegas for the Super Bowl, the NFL world descends on Mobile, Alabama first in the week leading up to the Super Bowl for the Senior Bowl. And we're going to get to some standouts there so far this week in Mobile, Alabama. Some first round picks out there in Mobile. So it's a really good group of players, especially some offensive linemen. But first, the direction of two more franchises have been set. We kind of thought it was headed toward Mike McDonald yesterday, and it became official that the Seattle Seahawks are hiring former Ravens defensive coordinator Mike McDonald is their new head coach. And the latest now, as of Thursday morning, it is Dan Quinn for the Washington Commanders. So new GM and Adam Peters. They were the first job open and the last job closed here in this coaching carousel. And it is Dan Quinn, former Atlanta Falcons head coach, and most recently, Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator. He's going to get a second shot at this thing with the Washington Commanders, and that is the brain trust now going forward in Washington to lead Josh Harris's new franchise of the Commanders into the future. So how do you feel about Dan Quinn being the hire for the Washington Commanders, Matt?
Yeah, and the timing's pretty interesting because basically as soon as we stopped recording yesterday, the Seattle news popped, and then right before we hit record today, the Washington news popped. It's like, okay, well, one worked in our favor, one we just missed. But I like it. I mean, I don't think it's a super exciting blow your doors off hire. I do think it's kind of a leadoff double or a leadoff walk, safe. I mean, it's not a crazy triple off the wall, Ricky Henderson, blah, blah, blah. I should stop with my baseball analogies before I show how old I really am. Lou Brock, but anyway, he's known as a cover 3 Seattle disciple, but he's really reinvented himself. They played a lot of man in Dallas, a lot of blitz. I mean, he's evolved with the times as a defensive mind. He has experience and should be able to understand the CEO aspect of it and the media aspect of it. So that mixed with a lot of experience in the division now too, I think is helpful as well. Those 3 opponents really well.
I know for a lot of Washington Commanders fans, a lot of folks out there, this seems like they got leftovers here, maybe a bit of a retread. Yeah. But when you look at the track record of coaches, the second time is kind of the charm for a lot of NFL head coaches. 100%. And Dan Quinn's a good football coach and probably deserves that second opportunity. Now he's going to get it with the Washington Commanders. And you brought up something interesting because cover 3 was the most in vogue coverage in the NFL for a long time. And he was there with the Legion of Boom with those Seattle defenses. And he's really stepped back from that. Now, cover 3 is still the most common coverage in the NFL because it gets 8 in the box and it's a good coverage against run defense as well. But Dan Quinn was kind of middle of the road this year, 38.2% cover 3 percentage, according to Cody Alexander, who charts this stuff all season long. You can find all of his charts and information about coverages on Twitter at @TheCoachA. But this season, 38.2% was just like around average, a little above average for cover 3 usage. Now, single high is still a huge part of his defense, but more man coverage, cover 1 single high coverage for Dan Quinn's Dallas Cowboys defense. Among the top, in fact, second or third in the NFL in cover 1 calls, 31.3% of the time for the Dallas Cowboys defense there. So a lot of single high, but more man, less of that standard old school cover 3 that teams really have have done a good job of figuring out how to beat through the air, but it's still a good coverage to run with 8 guys in the box to stop defenses. Why it's still run around the league 35% of the time, which is the most common coverage, cover 3 in the NFL. Good run defense. You've got your eyes forward. It's zone, but it's I'm blanking on his name right now. The guy who was the defense coordinator also in Seattle, who's with the Colts now. He's still over half the time, 55%, way above everybody else as far as he's been running cover 3. So he's running it a lot. Dan Quinn has kind of changed his stripes a little bit from those Seattle days. And even when he was a head coach with the Atlanta Falcons, how much cover 3 they ran, he's dialed that back quite a bit.
Yeah. And I think it just shows that he's willing to take a step back, reassess himself, reinvent himself. I mean, we had a lot of good things to say about the Raheem Morris hire. There's been a nice long break between first coaching stint and second, and done a lot of different things in between. Even Mike McCarthy's, between his Packers and Cowboys stint, supposedly dug into analytics, although that might have been partially a lie, and learned some things while you're not a head coach. So I think it's a real solid hire. I know that's not the best phrase you've ever heard, but I think it's a real solid hire.
By the way, Mike McDonald, while I've got the coverages up, Mike McDonald's Baltimore Ravens defense, kind of the opposite, one of the fewest cover 3 single high safety teams in the NFL. A lot more sim pressures. You'll see dropping defensive linemen into coverage, but still rushing 4. A lot more quarters coverage, cover 6, which is cover 4 quarters on one half of the field, and then cover 2 on the other side of the field. So you have two deep on this side, 1 deep on this side of the field, which is kind of a 3 deep coverage, but it's they get to it a different way, not to get too deep in the woods on these coverages, but 2 very different defensive styles for those last 2 defensive head coaches that were hired. And so very interesting there. And obviously with both of those teams and both of these coaches, Matt, it's all about the staffs that they hire around them. And particularly on the offensive side of the ball, because they're defensive guys.
Yeah, and even especially more so probably with Washington with the 2nd overall pick, that's going to be Drake May or, a quarterback, I'm sure. Now you wonder, does Bieniemy have a chance to still return, or is Quinn going to go get his guys? I mean, Quinn schemed up against Bieniemy twice last year. Was he impressed with him? Was he not? Who knows?
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I have, there's Brian Schottenheimer is in Dallas still, and he doesn't call the plays. So I don't know the rules on that. I know the Cowboys would say no if they can to not let an offensive coordinator go to a division rival, but he doesn't call plays, and I'm not sure if you can block it, even though it'd still be quote unquote offensive coordinator. I think play caller is a separate deal, and I'm not sure if you have to ask permission on that or not. So we'll find out. Brian Schottenheimer, if so, would probably be one of the leaders just because he was working with him in Dallas there, and Schottenheimer's not calling the plays as Mike McCarthy with the Dallas Cowboys. That would hurt the Cowboys to lose both coordinators, even though, McCarthy's the one that took over play calling duties there. But I would have a feeling that it's Shanahan tree offense that they're going to go with, because Adam Peters in San Francisco, Dan Quinn's offensive coordinator in Atlanta when he went to the Super Bowl 28-3. Everybody knows the story. Kyle Shanahan was the offensive coordinator there. And so I would guess that's the direction they go, and we'll find out what that offense ends up looking like. But that's so important. You're going to draft a quarterback number 2, got a ton of high picks, a lot of cap space. That's why everyone thought this was going to be an offensive coach for Washington. When Ben Johnson took his hat out of the ring, then I think they really had to reevaluate things. By the way, I want to talk about one more candidate next that didn't get the Washington job that I did a little work on, because Anthony Weaver, who's now with the Baltimore Ravens, who his role ends up being, was a guy that was on the list. It was Dan Quinn, Aaron Glenn, and Anthony Weaver. All defensive guys were the last 3 that they had gone through the interview process with. They ended up hiring Dan Quinn. But a quick note on maybe a future head coach next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. At the start of every new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same questions, the same question that NFL owners are asking themselves when they're going through the hiring process of finding a new direction and finding the right coaches and staff for their football teams. What's the one move I can make that'll take my business to the next level in 2024? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success as a small business all depends on the team you surround yourself with. That's why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And when you're talking about professionals, look, I'm on LinkedIn, you're on LinkedIn. 1 billion professionals are on LinkedIn. That's why it's the best place. And hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have time or resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy with tons of tools at your disposal. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So the coach that was not hired, Anthony Weaver, he was on the list, defensive line coach and assistant head coach. And it was really easy to see why he's assistant head coach. When I found a couple interviews of him and I had to double check. I was like, it's the same guy I remember. I'm getting old, man. I remember him 20 years ago coming out of Notre Dame. You know,
I remember he was a draft prospect, the D lineman, right? Exactly. Liked him then.
He was drafted high. He was a good player. He played for the Ravens, played for, I can't remember who else he played for. But he
was smart, team captain, tough guy, versatile,
Notre Dame is, you got to do something to get into Notre Dame, unlike some other schools out there. Pride in being a Golden Domer for a lot of the ex-Notre Dame players because of that. But he, played for, I think, a little under a decade. Now he's been coaching for a little over a decade. And I saw one interview from him talking about organizational structure and why the Ravens were so successful. And I was blown away in a 3-minute clip, 5-minute clip. Right. However it was, like, oh my God, this guy, I'm sure, is blowing away interviews. Now, he hasn't been a play caller on either side of the ball. So it'd be like it's a little bit more of a leap of faith, which is probably why Dan Quinn, he's done it. He's been a head coach. He's been a defensive play caller. One side of the football is going to be taken care of. And so it's a little bit more of a leap of faith for a guy who hasn't called plays, which is why I wonder if he ends up being the defensive coordinator for the Ravens now that Mike McDonald is gone. I think he'll be a super hot name in the very near future and might get a job in the next couple of years because he's a pretty impressive guy. Just listening to him, he had me sold. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I didn't know a lot about him as a head coach prospect, and I didn't see him on a lot of lists, but he was one of the finalists for Washington, and I wanted to get to know why. And I learned why pretty darn quick listening to him talk. So, I think he might have an opportunity. He's only been I think he was an interim with the Houston Texans in 2020. He was a D-line coach, and then I think he became interim D coordinator or something like that. But obviously, it's probably a huge step for him if he can call plays for that Ravens defense going forward. But Anthony Weaver, definitely a name to watch in future hiring cycles. I was impressed.
I wonder if McDonald could steal him and make him the D coordinator in Seattle.
I think I saw that McDonald is taking. Oh no, you're right. He could go because the DB's coaching it with Baltimore. It was thought that he could become the DC in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Or go with Mike McDonald to be the DC in Seattle. He ended up going to the Titans to be defensive coordinator.
Okay. Yeah, I knew I saw something on defense.
So he got a job. So I mean, the Ravens are getting pillaged right now if Weaver goes too.
Yeah, 100%. So I mean, I'm sure they're gonna do everything possible to try to keep him. Let's go back 1 second because I just want to throw one thing out there that I've been thinking about since yesterday's conversation with the Lions OC and the Texans OC not leaving anywhere. I wonder if owners are smartening up and saying, if we hire a very good defensive-minded head coach like Houston and Detroit did. Yeah, and I know Campbell's a tight end, but he's not the play caller, X's and O's offensive guy.
Yeah, he played offense, and he's an offensive guy, tight end coach, but he was not a play caller, right?
Right. I mean, he's not a Shanahan schemer. He's a tough guy. He's a leader. I wonder if owners are – there's no salary cap on your coaching money,
right,
payroll. If they just tell those guys, hey, instead of going be the head coach in Carolina, why don't I just triple your salary? Just to stay in Detroit for a year and run this thing back, or stay in Houston for a year, run this thing back.
We know Slowick and Ben Johnson are getting more money to stay and be offensive coordinators. How much more money?
It could be obscene.
Yeah, it could be anything. There's no cap. They could make more than the head coach theoretically.
Yeah, or hey, we'll give you 90% of what the head guy's making, and I don't think the two head guys at those two towns are making massive money. They're not making Sean Payton money. Whatever. I mean, what's a couple extra million for $1 billion franchise?
I do find it fascinating that most people, and I was guilty of this as well, And you look on social media, you look at people who cover the Seattle Seahawks, people who cover the Washington Commanders, and most people are treating the Mike McDonald hire as a home run hire and the Dan Quinn hire as like, you're kissing your sister or whatever. But what's funny is Dan Quinn, when he got hired in Atlanta, was Mike McDonald, right? He was the hot
exactly
organization,
really successful team and defense
doing it. So we really don't know, so actually, let's go to our guy Aaron Schatz, DVOA mastermind, who was on the show with us breaking down the conference championship teams, and still pertinent for the Chiefs and 49ers, that information if you want to go back and learn what DVOA is from Aaron Schatz. He had this to say, which I thought was interesting about Dan Quinn. He said Dan Quinn has fielded a top 5 DVOA defense in all 5 of the seasons where he was a defensive coordinator. In 6 years as head coach in Atlanta, Dan Quinn never fielded a defense with a DVOA higher than 14th. Coordinator and head coach are different skill sets. I find that idea fascinating, kind of going back to the Dan Campbell and Anthony Weaver conversation. Is it that important if you're bringing a scheme with you? Because 5 years from now, those schemes got to change anyway with the changing tide of the NFL. Having the guy who can run the show from the top is still more important.
I 100% agree. I mean, I think a leader of men, is more important than a schemer for sure. So that leaves us to McDonald. I mean, I don't think we know what he is in terms of leader of men, but I do like his path. He's the hot young coordinator like Quinn was at that point. At one point, people might not realize this, but the Harbaugh brothers kind of struck a deal, a couple years ago, where McDonald was this bright and shining star on the defensive staff when Wink Martindale was there with Baltimore. So I always get their names mixed up. I apologize. It's terrible. But Ravens Harbaugh says to Michigan Harbaugh, take my guy, make him a defensive coordinator, make him in charge of the entire defense. And he was phenomenal for the Wolverines in play call, everything. And then I'm going to bring him back in a year and I'm going to fire Wink, assuming that all goes well. Boom, boom. It went to plan, if not better. And he's kind of considered a defensive savant. And last thing I want to throw in with him, though, I think is interesting in this case is everyone's after the Shanahan McVay tree. Well, this guy might know how to shut that tree down.
He's done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah,
absolutely. Which is and now you're playing him twice a year, right? Or
exactly.
you're playing him more than that. You're playing half your schedule probably, because 4 of those games are against the Rams and the 49ers. If you're the Seattle,
the Rams did do well in Baltimore, but every other NFC team, including San Francisco, was overmatched by that defense.
And I will say Shanahan tree is one thing, but one of the things the Shanahan tree has is the number one thing is you're just trying to find answers and ways to beat defenses. It's not like a static thing where it's like, well, this is the scheme we run and everyone knows what the plays are going to be already. So every version of it and every coach comes out looking a lot different. Just like Mike McDaniel was with Kyle Shanahan every step of the way for over a decade and his right-hand man. That Dolphins offense looked completely different than the 49ers offense. Some staple stuff, a lot of motion, even more motion in a lot of cases, some new motions we hadn't seen a lot of that a lot of teams are now using, play action and, short passing and a lot of that stuff, but short to intermediate run and catch opportunities and, strong run game, outside zone. There's some staple concepts, but it still looked a lot different, just like McVay's does.
100%. So by all accounts, McDonald is an exciting, certainly a great defensive mind. And even Michigan's defense after he left had all the principles he brought with him. And I guess their defensive coordinator is going to follow Harbaugh to the Chargers. So what they're doing is innovative. And you mentioned it, it's a lot of sim pressures, not knowing where things are coming from. Middle of the field is really strong with the Hamiltons and Roquans and Queens and those type of guys. Like maybe he gets more out of Jamal Adams than anybody ever did, although I think he's probably a cut candidate.
Patrick Queen, also a free agent. Could he?
Interesting.
Follow him to Seattle potentially as well. And that's the thing too. So you look at why did Dan Quinn
and Matabuke and
why was defense in Seattle as a defense coordinator better than his defense as a head coach in Atlanta, and then also his Cowboys defense was better than the defense in Atlanta as head coach. Well, the guys, the Jimmies and Joes still count too. He didn't have Micah Parsons with him in Atlanta. That was the thing they always struggled to find in Atlanta was the pass rushers. And obviously they had insanely good defensive personnel in Seattle too. So you still got to have that. So whether it's Mike McDonald in Seattle or Dan Quinn in Washington, they've got to also be able to, manage the whole thing and be the CEO of the organization as the head coach. But they also got to find the players to run those schemes that they're bringing in.
Yeah, 100%. And Washington in particular, I mean, especially after trading both edge guys, their cupboards are pretty bare. But you did mention they got a ton of cap space, assuming quarterbacks at 2. The O-line could use a little, but you would think most of that will go to defense.
I got to imagine every resource that's not Drake May, if it ends up being, we're already plugging his name in as if it's him. We still don't know exactly, but most likely quarterback at 2. Whatever the other top 100 picks they have, whatever money they're spending in free agency, there's going to be a whole lot of defensive linemen, maybe some cover guys mixed into.
100%. I mean, maybe one O lineman sprinkled in there to firm things up, but I think it's going to be DDD like crazy. And you do have the defensive tackles in place, with Payne and Allen. So
so edge guys, edge, pass rush, and corners.
Makes a lot of sense. At least it looks like the Seahawks have their corners. They have some other issues. Yeah,
and the Seahawks are already pretty good. Flirting with the playoffs and a lot of pieces on defense for Mike McDonald to work with. They're obviously a lot closer. Have a veteran quarterback in place for him there.
And I think one of the reasons that Carroll is out is they've invested in defense. They traded for Leonard Williams. They gave Dante Jones a huge contract. I mean, a couple high picks on that side of the ball, and it just keeps getting worse every year. So there are some talented players on defense, at least in Seattle.
All right, as we get close to the Senior Bowl game this weekend, who's standing out this week at Senior Bowl practices? Next. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson. Got my Prize Picks mug as well, drinking my coffee here on a Thursday morning. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. How easy is Prize Picks? Well, it's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. If it's just it's you against the numbers. That's how easy it is. You pick 2 to 6 players, more or less, on their Prize Picks projections, stats, and you watch the winnings roll in. You're not playing against thousands of other players in a pool. There's no sharks in the pool, no professionals out there. It's just you against the numbers. You pick 2 to 6 players and more or less on those stat projections and win up to 25 times your money during the Super Bowl or NBA. Major League Baseball is coming. Tons of projections at Prize Picks to play with, even combo projections as well, and some Super Bowl specials. For example, George Kittle or Travis Kelce, and you could combo them with LeBron James or Steph Curry with the combo 3-pointers made plus receptions on Super Sunday, and a whole lot more. So download the app or go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app or go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code LockedOnNFL for a deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. I got a few names here. Particularly a lot of offensive linemen that are standing out. This is a really good offensive tackle class. And I think there's multiple first-round picks in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl. And a lot of times Senior Bowl is sort of the mid-round group, the day 2, early day 3, and throughout the draft, sort of a group of prospects. But there's a lot fewer with the NIL money in college, a lot fewer underclassmen this year. And even some of them going to the Senior Bowl because you're eligible for the Senior Bowl now, even if you are an early entrant into the NFL draft in some cases. So fascinating group and some first rounders for sure. Who's catching your eyes so far at Senior Bowl practices, man?
Let's just stress O-line, I guess. I mean, you threw it out there. There's 3 names to me that are wow players that I think almost are assuredly first rounders, and 2 are tackles. But let's start with the center from Oregon, Jackson Powers Johnson. So I watch them casually as I do all, Saturday games are on, but I'm not studying it and I'm trying to know who the names are. And obviously later in the college season, I watch more and I watch some clips and highlights and thinking, wow, this guy moves very, very well. He's very quick off the snap. He gets the second level quickly, changes direction. I'm guessing he's like a 300-pounder, maybe 305. He was 334. I mean, he's over 6'3" at 334. And he doesn't have very long arms, but he's got a really wide wingspan because shoulder to shoulder, he's so wide. And he handles power extremely well. He's nasty. He's got powerful hands, quick hands, great feet. I don't say this often, but there aren't many prospects that you can look at and the negative column is kind of empty. His is kind of empty.
It's pretty phenomenal. Reminds me a lot of Frank Ragnow when he was coming out of Arkansas, a bigger tackle that can still move. And he came up with a hamstring or something after the first day, but it was like sort of was it Deion Sanders who went to the combine, ran, and then left? That was kind of what he pulled. Just being there one day, showing exactly what he showed on tape. Already one of the top guys coming in, and if there's a center that goes in the first round, Jackson Powers Johnson's your guy.
100%. So 2 tackles I want to bring up too are Fuanga at Oregon State, who looks like a pure power right tackle, but is not heavy-footed at all. Just under 6'6", 332 pounds, great hands. Try to bull rush them. Good luck. And there's a lot of good edge defenders down there in these one-on-one drills. And yeah, these guys get beat here and there in that situation, but rarely. They win more than they lose, which is rare for a Senior Bowl. He looks like a plug-and-play right tackle that I'd probably even put ahead of like a Darnell Wright from last year, who went 10th overall, something along those lines. And then I think we have to talk about Tyler Guyton. I mean, Oklahoma had 2 tackles drafted very high last year, but day 1 and day 2. So he hasn't played a ton, and he's over 6'7". He's 328 pounds, and he has like no fat on his body. He's got like a lean waist, like a Tyron Smith type. Looks like he could be an underwear model or a power forward.
He looks like an NBA player turned offensive tackle. He's got that sort of build. It's pretty wild to see him in pads and see how long and big he is, and he's not round at all. And he bends his knees a little bit too, which is what you worry about with a tall guy. And it's still, some of the one-on-ones with Guyton, there's some rawness there, and you can get under his pads a little bit. But they're like Taliesin Fuaga and Tyler Guyton could not be more different in what the scouting report is going to be and who's going to like him, because Fuaga, it's like day 1, plug him in, he's good. Yeah, he's a mauler. He's going to get after it. Very high floor, maybe not as high of a ceiling, but a guy like Guyton, and there's a few of these offensive tackles that are going to go in the first round. There's another one I want to mention from Houston at the Senior Bowl as well. But you're kind of daring to dream. You're like, oh my gosh, if this guy hits his ceiling might be a lot higher. Maybe a right tackle, left tackle in the NFL, where Fuaga is going to get the treatment of he's a right tackle only and sub 34-inch arms, 33 3/8 arm length. So there's going to be teams, and we'll hear it before the draft. Fuaga could be an all-pro guard. Maybe we like him more at guard. And so I think he might fall out of the first half of the first round because of that, even though he's a plug-and-play player to me, and I love Fuaga. He'll get a little bit of that treatment. He's not as body beautiful maybe as someone like Tyler Guyton is. And one more name I want to throw out there, very similar height, weight to Guyton, is Patrick Paul out of Houston, and he could sneak into the late first round conversation as well. Again, 6'7", 333 pounds, 36 and a quarter inch arms. I mean, that is insane. That is antennas for arms. So if you want to dare to dream, and you look at a guy who's got a 7 foot something wingspan, long arms, 6'7", 333 pounds. Again, it's more of a raw developmental player like Guyton. Patrick Paul's another one. If you don't get Guyton early in the first round, maybe later in the first round, Patrick Paul could be your guy out of Houston.
It's another great name, because him and Guyton kind of look the same, in terms of their length and body beautiful and power forwardness.
Weight, by the way.
What's that?
Almost identical height and weight from those.
Oh, are they? A little bit longer arms on Paul. From my observations, and again, I'm not a draft expert at this stage, but I think Paul's more of a project than Guyton. He's not quite as powerful. I've seen him get beat with power a little bit more, and guys get under his pads. But I think O-line coaches are going to look at all these guys, but especially Paul and Guyton, and say, what can I turn those guys into as premium edge protectors?
Who else is standing out to you? Can I throw a wide receiver at you?
Do it.
That I think the Shanahan tree is going to be fighting over, and he's going to go up pretty high on draft boards, and he reminds me a little bit of the draft stock from last year of the Ole Miss receiver that went to Carolina. Now I'm blanking on his name.
Mingo.
Jonathan Mingo, yes.
Yeah,
Jonathan Mingo. He was kind of that guy who was like, yeah, he might be a third-round pick. It's like, oh, he went in the second round. He went higher than we thought, kind of thing. From Western Kentucky, Malachi Corley. He's 5'10 and a half, 215 pounds. We always hear about the next Deebo Samuel every single year, but this guy's probably one of the closer I've seen. He's so good after the catch. If you're looking for that type of player in that type of offense, I could see Shanahan and McDaniel and Bobby Slowick and whoever other disciples, McVay and these guys that get offensive coordinator jobs with new organizations potentially from these two new head coaching hires. They're going to be fighting over Malachi Corley, and I think he's going to get into the second round as well.
Yeah, 100% agree. Great after the catch. Very low average depth of target because it's just get him the ball and run over people at a low level. That type of guy. Very violent player. He blocks. He's competitive. I think people are going to be really excited about this guy. It's a great receiver class, so we'll see how it shapes out. Kind of like Deebo's, actually.
Yeah, that was a super strong class. Not that high. The first round guys weren't there, but second round was crazy. It was Deebo and AJ Brown and DK Metcalf. That was a really good wide receiver class. Absolutely. Who else you like?
Let's throw one more name out there. There's some guy doing the coverage is Toledo corner Quinn Mitchell.
Yeah.
He's over 6 feet. He's 195 pounds. He's very physical. He'll play the run. Took the ball away a ton against bad competition, frankly. And the big question for him was at Toledo, they never asked him to press. It was just their defensive scheme. But he has all the tools to do it very fast, and he's been great in press coverage. And it's so hard to force incompletions in a Senior Bowl setting, but very few people are even catching the ball on Mitchell. I think he's a guaranteed first rounder.
There you go. A lot of first-round talent at the Senior Bowl, and we will cover a lot more of the talent that is at the Senior Bowl throughout every round of the draft. And, of course, got you covered every day of everything that happens in the offseason, draft, combine, Super Bowl, free agency. It's all coming, and we've got you every day covered here at Peacock and Williamson. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network. Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.